Hello, true crime fans. Welcome to Debate the News True Crime. I'm Joseph Labasco, joined by our amazing other host, Adrian Barker. Tonight, we're delving into the disturbing case of the Turpin family, a Southern California couple who turned their home into a private prison for their 13 children.
Joseph, this is the infamous House of Horrors story of monster parents David and Louise Turpin, whose shocking abuse of their kids went undetected for decades until one brave teenager made a daring escape in 2018.
Tonight's discussion involves extremely disturbing descriptions of child abuse, torture, and neglect that listeners may find upsetting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. If you or someone you know needs support, help may be available via the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. Alternatively, you can contact the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. Adrian and I are not law enforcement officers, attorneys, or medical professionals. We do our best to research each case thoroughly, but the show is recorded live with minimal editing. Any factual inaccuracies are unintentional. Any individuals, organizations, or entities we discuss who haven't been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself, Adrian, or Debate the News. Long before they became known as perpetrators of one of the worst child abuse cases in California history, David Allen Turpin and Louise Robinette were an unassuming young couple from West Virginia. They met as teenagers and married in 1985, when David was 23 and Louise was just 16. The Turpins would go on to have 13 children, 10 daughters and 3 sons between 1988 and 2015.
By the late 1990s, the Turpins were living near Fort Worth and Rio Vista, Texas, and they kept to themselves. The neighbors rarely saw the children. When they did, the kids appeared pale, quiet, and dressed in matching outfits, an early sign of the parents' control. David was working as a software engineer at Lockheed Martin, but the family struggled financially. They declared bankruptcy in 2001 under a mountain of debt. Louise began homeschooling the children around 2003. She registered their home as a private school, calling it the Sandcastle Day School, which meant minimal state oversight and no routine inspections.
In 2002, sheriff's deputies came to the Turpin home twice due to odd incidents. In one incident, apparently the family's pig escaped and got into the neighbor's dog food. The officers found some things odd, but as far as we know, never pursued a deeper investigation. Little did they know, things were not well in the Turpin household.
By 2007, David and Louise had moved 10 of their children, the older ones, into a filthy, dilapidated trailer on their property, while they kept the youngest kids in the main house. The parents delivered meager groceries to the trailer once a week, nowhere near enough food. Jordan, just 6 years old at the time, later recalled surviving by eating ketchup packets or ice. The trailer's conditions were horrific, littered with trash and feces, dead animals decaying inside. Ropes were tied to the beds, hinting that children had been restrained there, yet neighbors remained unaware of what was happening. In 2010, the Turpins abruptly left Texas and moved to California, and they took their dark secrets with them.
Once in California, the isolation and abuse only grew worse. In 2010, the Turpin family settled in Murrieta, California, after David got a new job as a defense contractor. But behind closed doors, the abuse continued to intensify. In 2011, David and Louise even renewed their wedding vows in Las Vegas with an Elvis impersonator officiating. All 13 children were there, dressed in identical outfits. In 2012, they took a family trip to Disneyland and posted smiling photos on Facebook.
In reality, the children's lives, they were a nightmare. They were allowed to shower about once per year and fed barely enough to survive. often just one peanut butter sandwich or a small frozen burrito per day. These children got no exercise and were kept on a reverse sleep schedule. They were awake at night and sleeping during the day. That way, no one would spot them outside.
By 2014, the Turpins moved again, this time to a home in Perris, California, the house that would later be infamously known as the House of Horrors. Neighbors would later recall that the Turpin children looked almost ghostly, malnourished, pale, and strangely silent and less spoken to. They often moved in an odd, stiff manner, and some of them would even skip instead of walk. Louise's sisters grew suspicious during these years and tried to visit, but David and Louise blocked family members from contacting the kids, keeping the outside worlds away.
Meanwhile, the abuse of the children reached its peak. The Turpin kids were frequently chained to their beds for the smallest infractions. For example, if a child washed their hands above the wrist or played with water, the parents viewed it as misbehavior. Punishments were brutal. The children were beaten, sometimes with ropes or belts, confined to small spaces, and often left shackled for days in filth. There was no medical care, no schooling, no outside friends, no contacts were allowed at all.
In the early hours of January 14, 2018, one of the older children finally made a break for freedom. 17-year-old Jordan Turpin had been planning an escape for 2 years, and that morning, she climbed out a window of the house. She was so malnourished that at 17, she looked closer to 10 years old. She carried with her a deactivated old cell phone and somehow managed to use it to call 911. Trembling and unsure, Jordan told the dispatcher, quote, "My parents are abusive, my siblings are captive."
When the Riverside County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Turpin home, they found a nightmarish scene. The officers discovered 13 siblings, ranging from 2 years old to 29, inside their home. Many of the children were severely underweight and emaciated, and some of them were actually chained to the furniture. The house was foul smelling, caked in dirt and human waste, and the officers realized the refrigerator was empty.
David and Louise Turpin were immediately arrested, and as the horrific details came to light, the story made headlines worldwide. Authorities charged the Turpins with multiple counts of torture, child abuse, false imprisonment, and other crimes. The media aptly dubbed it the House of Horrors, and the world looked on in shock at how such cruelty could go unseen for so many years.
On February 22nd, 2019, Monster David and his monster wife Louise each pleaded guilty to 14 felony counts, including torture, child cruelty, abuse of dependent adults, and false imprisonment. And in April of 2019, a judge sentenced both of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. It seemed like a measure of justice, but for the Turpin children, the story was not over.
Even after their rescue, the Turpin siblings continued to face hardships. The system that was supposed to protect them next fell disastrously short. By 2021, several of the minor Turpin children had been placed by social services into an allegedly safe foster home, which turned out to be another house of abuse. Instead of finding a loving refuge, some of the Turpin siblings were subjected to new trauma in foster care, forced to endure hunger, abuse, and filthy living conditions all over again under the care of a foster family. At the same time, large donations from the public poured in to aid the Turpin children, but hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for their recovery became tied up in a trust that the adult siblings had trouble accessing. In short, the kids did not get the timely help they desperately needed.
In July of 2022, 6 of the Turpin siblings filed a lawsuit against Riverside County and ChildNet, which is the foster care agency, claiming that officials placed them in the home of abusive foster parents. Those foster parents, Marcelino and Rosa Alguin, was later charged with abusing multiple children in their care. and that included the Turpin siblings. In October of 2024, they pleaded guilty to child cruelty and abuse charges. And the foster father, Monster Marcelino Alcuin, he's sentenced to just 7 years in prison for his crimes. By the way, his wife and daughter, who were also indicated, they received lesser penalties. A faithful report in 2022 described the post-rescue handling of the Turpin children as a failure of the child welfare system. And as of today, the Turpin's siblings, they're largely on their own and they are scattered in various locations. Some of the older ones have been able to gain independence and they're trying to rebuild their lives, while the younger siblings, they remain under care. All of them, however, carry deep scars from the unimaginable abuse and the subsequent failures of a system that was supposed to help them. This story just is horrific and it's real and it's happening. So, all right, I want to hear your reactions to the case. I'm very aware of this case. In fact, I have a very close friend who is in contact with the older children in this case. So I get updates on these individuals quite often. It's very upsetting because I lived in the system, so I know. It's really heartbreaking to see that these siblings were not kept together. It's upsetting that the system failed and neglected to find them a home where they could be safe. And unfortunately, a lot of these kids get placed in homes where they're abusive and the parents are just in it for the money. This is where the system, in my opinion, needs to change. It's overall upsetting and heartbreaking.
First of all, I have to say, I cried so much learning about this case. It's just heartbreaking. To me, this is a such failure from the system. The cruelty that these kids went through for so many years. I mean, it's one thing that you get abused one time, two times, but these kids suffer for years and years of their lives by their parents. And then they feel like they're finally free, like they are going to be taken care of. How can you trust human beings after that? Knowing they not only your parents abuse you, but now you are going to get help and you continue to be abused. Did you know that one of them actually was assaulted? And on the interview, she didn't know where she was going to eat that day. Hundreds of people gave money for them to be taken care of, to go to school, and to have food and basic things. She didn't know where she was going to eat.
I first wanted to say that I have heard this story before. I remember, I think I saw some clips of it actually, of the girl when she got away and the interview where there were some very simple things about life, terms that she didn't know how to speak, I'd never heard before. She was articulate enough, but was just absolutely clueless and not given any vision of the outside world. But when I heard this story from you guys this time, it sounded different because when I've seen it or heard it broadcast before, it's always kind of been a story with a good ending. We were given the impression that heroes came in and saved the children when the girl finally escaped. And what I'm hearing now is so egregious. It's a kick in the stomach part of the story that I hadn't heard. Why aren't we focusing on the welfare of the children? Isn't that what we're so upset about in the prosecution in the first place? So why aren't the children the priority afterward? I just wanted to say thank you for presenting the story in the way that you did and giving the facts that you did, because that perspective was one that I needed, because this was not a hero story. Lisa, you're 100% right, and the children should come first. There's a lot of good homes, but there's a lot of shitty homes. I think everybody can agree with that. The shitty ones have a way of manipulating, convincing, coercing DCF workers to make it look like, yeah, our home is great. Our home is this. We do this. They have a way of picturing it and placing it, and they cover up. Their house has to be inspected. So DCF, and I'm not necessarily placing the blame on DCF, but DCF, they're blindsided because they think they're going into this home that is awesome. They've got all these great kids. If they're doing the right thing, they've checked off the check boxes, so to speak. And you also have to remember that these children have probably had more than one caseworker where their file just gets handed over to the next one. So whatever caseworker they had, whatever story they heard, it's like playing telephone. They're getting different stories. In this situation, the siblings were together in that home going through that torture and abuse, right? And then they get separated. I I know what that's like to be separated from a sibling. It actually makes it worse. They depended on each other. It is very upsetting that these siblings are separated, that they're not together, that DCF failed to keep them together, and it's sad. First of all, Heather, thank you for being so brutally honest. Heather had a lot of good points. Joseph?
So, my big question is, how did the Turpin family get away with this for so long?
I watched a story on this, and they did an interview with Mrs. Turpin's siblings. And the family would fly them out for the holidays and stuff. And then all of a sudden, they weren't flying them to visit them for the holidays. And then I switched to video calls. Once they started to question them, they completely cut them off altogether. They also had a neighbor that was on the interview too, and they had said that they basically kept the kids away from everyone. Anytime somebody would question them, they would cut them off.
Yeah, Debbie, it makes sense. And we saw this in the White Feather case. We haven't released that episode yet. We will eventually, which was a similar situation. They moved to a very rural area where the neighbors were far apart, and they kept their adopted children living outside in a disheveled shed. So this seems to be a pattern in some of these abuse cases.
Yes, Joseph, one thing that one of the daughters say, they're very good manipulators. She said that in one interview. And so they chose to homeschool, pretending that the kids were getting education, but they actually were not. Remember, they didn't even know what medication was. When the police officer asked the girl who escaped, he said, "Are you taking any medication?" And she said, "What's medication?" She didn't even know what medication was. So again, manipulation, right? Trying to control everybody.
Another thing that's a factor about this case, this town they lived in, it was a town of 75, 80,000 people. I think it was in San Bernardino County or Riverside County, maybe. It's out there. I mean, there's nothing around. They might have had one neighbor close to them. It's such an isolating, desolate part of California that even when they broke out, I bet the next neighbor was miles away or not close.
Good point, Andy.
So what I wanted to mention is so important to keep in mind that people feel sorry when they get caught, right? They knew exactly what they were doing. And the only reason they were crying in court is because they got caught. Otherwise, they would have continued doing what they were doing. I didn't believe those tears. There is no excuse. How can you also go to Las Vegas and get married again? What is it? Renew your vows, have the kids all dressed up, take pictures to pretend that everything is okay. They had clean clothes when they were in Las Vegas. And then they went back to the house and they got changed in dirty clothes. You're going to tell me that that's insanity? You were well aware of what you're doing. So, yes, Joseph, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were evil people.
Yeah, absolutely, Mariana. And I also wanted to mention the fact that they had 13 children. I'd be interested to hear, Heather, what you have to say about that. If the fact that there were 13 kids complicated even further the foster care placement, because I would imagine that, having 13 kids all in one home is probably difficult as well.
100%. Yes. Right on the money. They have to sit with each child, do a private interview about what they experience, match that child up with the right home. If a foster family is worried that there could be potential abuse coming in from another child, they're going to protect the children in that home. That is why it is hard placing two. It's hard placing one, let alone 13 children, right? Every child has a different need, whether it's intellectual disabilities, whether it's physical disabilities, whether it's a safety issue. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And it's hard to say which one goes to this home, which siblings do we keep together? And then you have to look at how many kids are already in this home. Are they biological? How old are they? Because a lot of times these homes, there's very strict rules about taking in children if there's already biological children in the home. They encourage you not to take anybody under a certain age just so there is no abuse. Yeah, at the end of the day, those were the two reasons that these children, all 13, got separated.
That's interesting, Heather. Yeah, devastating.
Adrian, if there's any other questions you have to ask, or if anyone else wants to comment on anything we've spoke about, definitely go ahead.
Anne, take it away.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. What would be one change that could occur that could move the dial on improving the system? Communication. It's communication within the DCF workers. These kids get dropped off and there's not even a medical record on them. There's no folder handed. They're underpaid, overstaffed. They have case upon their desk. But at the end of the night, there has to be communication first and foremost. If there's no communication with these DCF workers back and forth, we're not going to know how to help. It's communication. It's got to start happening.
Heather, I think it's moolah, the money. And, I would like to say this, okay? How many of you guys, you like NFL, NBA, all the different sports teams? Why playing football do you make 6, 7, 8 figures and yet taking care of our children? When I see CPS and how much they work and the caseload they're getting, when I look into it, I'm like, wow, I feel like we are not paying enough in the system. That was the first time I went to court, witnessed my first case. I was like, why is so much money going to our politicians and so many places? And maybe as Americans, we need to look at how much we value our children. If we value our children, then we pay those that need to support them with more money because then they wouldn't be exhausted. They would have some people that could actually take the children and before they place them, make sure that they've got everything that they need, talk with them. Advocacy centers are very important to build. Heather, you're probably familiar with an advocacy center, which is one location. If your community doesn't have an advocacy center and a child is being brought to them, they have to go to a doctor in one place, tell their story. Then they have to go to another location, tell their story. Then they have to go to another location. Whereas an advocacy center brings the child there and everyone comes to support the child. The child is the focus. I'm familiar with this because I was on the board for the Children's Advocacy Center in Kissimmee, Florida, and the program is amazing. So, there's a lot of these cases right there around Disney World. Even the happiest place in the world has some of the saddest stories around. Joseph, what do you think?
I agree with both of you, communication and money, but I think systems in place to communicate effectively back and forth would make much better usage of what money and resources they do have. I do just have one more question. Does anyone know anything about homeschooling or what checks and balances there are, like generally?
I've had two kids be homeschooled, and there's no home visit. There's nothing. You can register and sign them up as long as you submit their grades and everything from the last school. All the curriculums organized. I don't know what it was like with the homeschooling for them, but
They offer community resources, free things like art classes and PE so that homeschool kids can gather, but they didn't ask, listen, they don't know anything about us. They just gave us the curriculum and it was all about reporting.
Thank you, Lisa. That is, to me, really a very scary thing because I would think, if you said, what do you think of homeschooling? I would say the idea is beautiful. I love it. And I love the opportunity. But isn't that where it's needed most? Having oversight? Because we know that a lot of these crimes are hidden away. And the first is homeschooling. It seems like that is a common denominator. There's a wide variety of regulations, so you can check with your own state to see. But yeah, most of it, it's non-existent and very few are comprehensive. I would love to understand why some forms were filled out and a couple pictures were taken of the outside home. And so they're approved and we only go in and check once a year. It literally doesn't make sense to me. Good question. Glad you brought it up.
I agree with you on that, Adrian. My information is anecdotal based on some family members, so don't take it as fact. My impression is that if you register with the state that you're homeschooling, they get money for that student, but there's no motivation beyond that for the state to further follow up with the family because that box is now checked and it costs them resources to follow up with you. And there's nothing in the state law that requires them to further follow up with homeschooling families. That could be changed by the legislature, to your point. So there is action that could be taken locally with families to advocate to have more requirements put in place.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense. Okay, Joseph, you lead the way.
Thanks, Adrian. The Turpin case is a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight and the many ways our system can fail those who depend on them.
Before we close, a final note. This episode dealt with extremely severe abuse and trauma, which can be deeply triggering. If you or someone you know needs support, please call the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4, then the letter A, and then child, CHILD. 1-800, the number 4, the letter A, child. Or visit childhelp.org for resources. Local crisis centers and child protective services are also available to help. Our hope is that if we've inspired one person to say, maybe I'll look into being a guardian ad litem, maybe I'll look into being a foster parent, then Joseph, our work, I feel, has been done. And let me just take a minute to thank Mariana. 99.9% of the time, Mariana's here. You all get to know her lovely voice. Come on in and get to meet her in person. Debbie, thank you so much. Lisa, thank you. The words that you said really did strike a chord. Heather, sharing like you did touched us all. We're so glad you're doing rooms here on Chatter, and we thank you for the previous episode. And thank you. You brought up some great points. Andy, amazing. I'm so glad you're in the room. You always bring up interesting points. Thank you. And Joseph, we're going to be back next week with another story. So until then, you guys, don't just listen, act. Stay vigilant. Stay compassionate. Give your family a hug tonight. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.